Autobiography of a Yogi. By Paramahansa Yogananda. Chapter 35. The Christ-like life of Lahiri Mahasaya. Thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. In these words to John the Baptist, and in asking John to baptize him, Jesus was acknowledging the divine rights of his guru. From a reverent study of the Bible from an Oriental viewpoint, and from intuitional perception, I am convinced that John the Baptist was, in past lives, the guru of Christ. There are numerous passages in the Bible which infer that John and Jesus in their last incarnations were, respectively, Elijah and his disciple Elisha. These are the spellings in the Old Testament. The Greek translators spelled the names as Elias and Eliseus. They reappear in the New Testament in these changed forms. The very end of the Old Testament is a prediction of the reincarnation of Elijah and Elisha. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Thus John, Elijah, sent before the coming of the Lord, was born slightly earlier to serve as a herald for Christ. An angel appeared to Zacharias the father to testify that his coming son John would be no other than Elijah, Elias. But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Jesus twice unequivocally identified Elijah, Elias, as John. Elias is come already, and they knew him not. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. Again, Christ says, For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if ye will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. When John denied that he was Elias, Elijah, he meant that in the humble garb of John he came no longer in the outward elevation of Elijah the great guru. In his former incarnation he had given the mantle of his glory and his spiritual wealth to his disciple Elisha. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. And he said, Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him. The roles became reversed, because Elijah John was no longer needed to be the ostensible guru of Elisha Jesus, now perfected in divine realization. When Christ was transfigured on the mountain, it was his guru Elias, with Moses, whom he saw. Again, in his hour of extremity on the cross, Jesus cried out the divine name, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, This man calleth for Elias. Let us see whether Elias will come to save him. The eternal bond of guru and disciple that existed between John and Jesus was present also for Babaji and Lahiri Mahasaya. With tender solicitude the deathless guru swam the Lethean waters that swirled between the last two lives of his Kila, and guided the successive steps taken by the child and then by the man Lahiri Mahasaya. It was not until the disciple had reached his 33rd year that Babaji deemed the time to be ripe to openly re-establish the never-severed link. Then, after their brief meeting near Raniket, the selfless master banished his dearly beloved disciple from the little mountain group, releasing him for an outward world mission. My son, I shall come whenever you need me. What mortal lover can bestow that infinite promise? Unknown to society in general, a great spiritual renaissance began to flow from a remote corner of Benares. Just as the fragrance of flowers cannot be suppressed, so Lahiri Mahasaya, quietly living as an ideal householder, could not hide his innate glory. Slowly, from every part of India, the devotees sought the divine nectar of the liberated master. The English office superintendent was one of the first to notice a strange transcendental change in his employee, whom he endearingly called Ecstatic Babu. "Sir, you seem sad. What is the trouble?" Lahiri Mahasaya made this sympathetic inquiry one morning to his employer. "My wife in England is critically ill. I am torn by anxiety. I shall get you some word about her." Lahiri Mahasaya left the room and sat for a short time in a secluded spot. On his return he smiled consolingly. "Your wife is improving, she is now writing you a letter." The omniscient yogi quoted some parts of the missive. "Ecstatic Babu, I already know that you are no ordinary man. Yet I am unable to believe that, at will, you can banish time and space." The promised letter finally arrived. The astounded superintendent found that it contained not only the good news of his wife's recovery, but also the same phrases which, weeks earlier, Lahiri Mahasaya had repeated. The wife came to India some months later. She visited the office, where Lahiri Mahasaya was quietly sitting at his desk. The woman approached him reverently. "Sir," she said, "it was your form, haloed in glorious light, that I beheld months ago by my sickbed in London. At that moment I was completely healed. Soon after, I was able to undertake the long ocean voyage to India. Day after day, one or two devotees besought the sublime Guru for Kriya initiation. In addition to these spiritual duties, and to those of his business and family life, the great master took an enthusiastic interest in education. He organized many study groups, and played an active part in the growth of a large high school in the Bengali Tola section of Benares. His regular discourses on the scriptures came to be called his Gita Assembly, eagerly attended by many truth seekers. By these manifold activities, Lahiri Mahasaya sought to answer the common challenge: after performing one's business and social duties, where is the time for devotional meditation? The harmoniously balanced life of the great householder guru became the silent inspiration of thousands of questioning hearts. Earning only a modest salary, thrifty, unostentatious, accessible to all, the master carried on naturally and happily in the path of worldly life. Though ensconced in the seat of the Supreme One, Lahiri Mahasaya showed reverence to all men, irrespective of their differing merits. When his devotees saluted him, he bowed in turn to them. With a childlike humility, the master often touched the feet of others, but seldom allowed them to pay him similar honor, even though such obeisance toward the Guru is an ancient Oriental custom. A significant feature of Lahiri Mahasaya's life was his gift of Kriya initiation to those of every faith. Not Hindus only, but Muslims and Christians were among his foremost disciples. Monists and dualists, those of all faiths or of no established faith, were impartially received and instructed by the universal Guru. One of his highly advanced chellists was Abdul Ghaffur Khan, a Mohammedan. It shows great courage on the part of Lahiri Mahasaya that, although a high caste Brahmin, he tried his utmost to dissolve the rigid caste bigotry of his time. Those from every walk of life found shelter under the master's omnipresent wings. Like all God-inspired prophets, Lahiri Mahasaya gave new hope to the outcasts and downtrodden of society. Always remember that you belong to no one, and no one belongs to you. Reflect that someday you will suddenly have to leave everything in this world, so make the acquaintanceship of God now, the great Guru told his disciples. Prepare yourself for the coming astral journey of death by daily riding in the balloon of God perception. Through delusion you are perceiving yourself as a bundle of flesh and bones, which at best is a nest of troubles. Meditate unceasingly, that you may quickly behold yourself as the infinite essence, free from every form of misery. Cease being a prisoner of the body, using the secret key of Kriya, learn to escape into spirit. The great Guru encouraged his various students to adhere to the good traditional discipline of their own faith. Stressing the all-inclusive nature of Kriya as a practical technique of liberation, Lahiri Mahasaya then gave his chellists liberty to express their lives in conformance with environment and upbringing. A Muslim should perform his namage worship 4 times daily, the master pointed out. 4 times daily a Hindu should sit in meditation. A Christian should go down on his knees 4 times daily, praying to God and then reading the Bible. With wise discernment the Guru guided his followers into the paths of bhakti, devotion, karma, action, jnana, wisdom, or raja, royal or complete, yogas, according to each man's natural tendencies. The master, who was slow to give his permission to devotees wishing to enter the formal path of monkhood, always cautioned them to first reflect well on the austerities of the monastic life. The great Guru taught his disciples to avoid theoretical discussion of the scriptures. He only is wise who devotes himself to realizing, not reading only, the ancient revelations, he said. Solve all your problems through meditation. Exchange unprofitable religious speculations for actual God contact. Clear your mind of dogmatic theological debris, let in the fresh, healing waters of direct perception. Attune yourself to the active inner guidance, the divine voice has the answer to every dilemma of life. Though man's ingenuity for getting himself into trouble appears to be endless, the infinite succor is no less resourceful. The Master's omnipresence was demonstrated one day before a group of disciples who were listening to his exposition of the Bhagavad Gita. As he was explaining the meaning of Kutastha Chaitanya or the Christ consciousness in all vibratory creation, Lahiri Mahasaya suddenly gasped and cried out, "I am drowning in the bodies of many souls off the coast of Japan." The next morning the cellist read a newspaper account of the death of many people whose ship had foundered the preceding day near Japan. The distant disciples of Lahiri Mahasaya were often made aware of his enfolding presence. "I am ever with those who practice Kriya," he said consolingly to cellists who could not remain near him. "I will guide you to the cosmic home through your enlarging perceptions." Swami Satyananda was told by a devotee that, unable to go to Benares, the man had nevertheless received precise Kriya initiation in a dream. Lahiri Mahasaya had appeared to instruct the Kila in answer to his prayers. If a disciple neglected any of his worldly obligations, the master would gently correct and discipline him. Lahiri Mahasaya's words were mild and healing, even when he was forced to speak openly of a chella's faults, Sri Yukteswar once told me. He added ruefully, "No disciple ever fled from our master's barbs." I could not help laughing, but I truthfully assured Sri Yukteswar that, sharp or not, his every word was music to my ears. Lahiri Mahasaya carefully graded Kriya into 4 progressive initiations. He bestowed the 3 higher techniques only after the devotee had manifested definite spiritual progress. One day a certain Kila, convinced that his worth was not being duly evaluated, gave voice to his discontent. "Master," he said, "surely I am ready now for the 2nd initiation." At this moment the door opened to admit a humble disciple, Brinda Bhagat. He was a Benares postman. "Brinda, sit by me here." The great Guru smiled at him affectionately. "Tell me, are you ready for the 2nd technique of Kriya?" The little postman folded his hands in supplication. "Gurudeva," he said in alarm, "no more initiations, please. How can I assimilate any higher teachings? I have come today to ask your blessings, because the first divine Kriya has filled me with such intoxication that I cannot deliver my letters. Already Brinda swims in the sea of spirit." At these words from Lahiri Mahasaya, his other disciple hung his head. "Master," he said, "I see I have been a poor workman, finding fault with my tools." The postman, who was an uneducated man, later developed his insight through Kriya to such an extent that scholars occasionally sought his interpretation on involved scriptural points. Innocent alike of sin and syntax, little Brinda won renown in the domain of learned pundits. Besides the numerous Benares disciples of Lahiri Mahasaya, hundreds came to him from distant parts of India. He himself travelled to Bengal on several occasions, visiting at the homes of the fathers-in-law of his two sons. Thus blessed by his presence, Bengal became honeycombed with small Kriya groups. Particularly in the districts of Krishnagar and Bishnupur, many silent devotees to this day have kept the invisible current of spiritual meditation flowing. Among many saints who received Kriya from Lahiri Mahasaya may be mentioned the illustrious Swami Bhaskarananda Sarasvati of Benares, and the Deogar ascetic of high stature, Balananda Brahmachari. For a time Lahiri Mahasaya served as private tutor to the son of Maharaja Iswari Narayan Sinha Bahadur of Benares. Recognizing the master's spiritual attainment, the Maharaja, as well as his son, sought Kriya initiation, as did the Maharaja Jotendra Mohan Thakur. A number of Lahiri Mahasaya's disciples with influential worldly position were desirous of expanding the Kriya circle by publicity. The Guru refused his permission. One Kila, the royal physician to the Lord of Benares, started an organized effort to spread the master's name as Kashi Baba, exalted one of Benares. Again the Guru forbade it. Let the fragrance of the Kriya flower be wafted naturally, without any display, he said. Its seeds will take root in the soil of spiritually fertile hearts. Although the great master did not adopt the system of preaching through the modern medium of an organization, or through the printing press, he knew that the power of his message would rise like a resistless flood, inundating by its own force the banks of human minds. The changed and purified lives of devotees were the simple guarantees of the deathless vitality of Kriya. In 1886, 25 years after his Raniket initiation, Lahiri Mahasaya was retired on a pension. With his availability in the daytime, disciples sought him out in ever-increasing numbers. The great Guru now sat in silence most of the time, locked in the tranquil lotus posture. He seldom left his little parlor, even for a walk or to visit other parts of the house. A quiet stream of chelas arrived, almost ceaselessly, for a darshan, holy sight, of the Guru. To the awe of all beholders, Lahiri Mahasaya's habitual physiological state exhibited the superhuman features of breathlessness, sleeplessness, cessation of pulse and heartbeat, calm eyes unblinking for hours, and a profound aura of peace. No visitors departed without upliftment of spirit, all knew they had received the silent blessing of a true man of God. The master now permitted his disciple, Panchanan Bhattacharya, to open an Arya mission institution in Calcutta. Here the saintly disciple spread the message of Kriya Yoga, and prepared for public benefit certain yogic herbal medicines. In accordance with ancient custom, the master gave to people in general a neem oil for the cure of various diseases. When the Guru requested a disciple to distill the oil, he could easily accomplish the task. If anyone else tried, he would encounter strange difficulties, finding that the medicinal oil had almost evaporated after going through the required distilling processes. Evidently the master's blessing was a necessary ingredient. The Arya Mission Institution undertook the publication of many of the Guru's scriptural commentaries. Like Jesus and other great prophets, Lahiri Mahasaya himself wrote no books, but his penetrating interpretations were recorded and arranged by various disciples. Some of these voluntary amanuenses were more discerning than others in correctly conveying the profound insight of the Guru, yet, on the whole, their efforts were successful. Through their zeal, the world possesses unparalleled commentaries by Lahiri Mahasaya on 26 ancient scriptures. Sri Ananda Mohan Lahiri, a grandson of the Master, has written an interesting booklet on Kriya. The text of the Bhagavad Gita is a part of the great epic, the Mahabharata, which possesses several knot points, Vyaskutas. Sri Ananda wrote. Keep those knot points unquestioned, and we find nothing but mythical stories of a peculiar and easily misunderstood type. Keep those knot points unexplained, and we have lost a science which the East has preserved with superhuman patience after a quest of thousands of years of experiment. It was the commentaries of Lahiri Mahasaya which brought to light, clear of allegories, the very science of religion that had been so cleverly put out of sight in the riddle of scriptural letters and imagery. No longer a mere unintelligible jugglery of words, the otherwise unmeaning formulas of Vedic worship have been proved by the Master to be full of scientific significance. We know that man is usually helpless against the insurgent sway of evil passions, but these are rendered powerless and man finds no motive in their indulgence when there dawns on him a consciousness of superior and lasting bliss through Kriya. Here the give up, the negation of the lower passions, synchronizes with the take-up, the assertion of a beatitude. Without such a course, hundreds of moral maxims which run in mere negatives are useless to us. Our eagerness for worldly activity kills in us the sense of spiritual awe. We cannot comprehend the great life behind all names and forms, just because science brings home to us how we can use the powers of nature. This familiarity has bred a contempt for her ultimate secrets. Our relation with nature is one of practical business. We tease her, so to speak, to know how she can be used to serve our purposes. We make use of her energies, whose source yet remains unknown. In science, our relation with nature is one that exists between a man and his servant, or in a philosophical sense she is like a captive in the witness box. We cross-examine her, challenge her, and minutely weigh her evidence in human scales which cannot measure her hidden values. On the other hand, when the self is in communion with a higher power, nature automatically obeys, without stress or strain, the will of man. This effortless command over nature is called miraculous by the uncomprehending materialist. The life of Lahiri Mahasaya set an example which changed the erroneous notion that yoga is a mysterious practice. Every man may find a way through Kriya to understand his proper relation with nature, and to feel spiritual reverence for all phenomena, whether mystical or of everyday occurrence, in spite of the matter-of-factness of physical science. We must bear in mind that what was mystical 1,000 years ago is no longer so, and what is mysterious now may become lawfully intelligible 100 years hence. It is the infinite, the ocean of power, that is at the back of all manifestations. The law of Kriya Yoga is eternal. It is true like mathematics, like the simple rules of addition and subtraction. The law of Kriya can never be destroyed. Burn to ashes all the books on mathematics, the logically minded will always rediscover such truths. Destroy all the sacred books on yoga, its fundamental laws will come out whenever there appears a true yogi who comprises within himself pure devotion and consequently pure knowledge. Just as Babaji is among the greatest of avatars, a Mahavatar, and Sri Yukteswar a Jain avatar or incarnation of wisdom, so Lahiri Mahasaya may justly be called Yogavatar, or incarnation of yoga. By the standards of both qualitative and quantitative good, he elevated the spiritual level of society. In his power to raise his close disciples to Christ-like stature and in his wide dissemination of truth among the masses, Lahiri Mahasaya ranks among the saviors of mankind. His uniqueness as a prophet lies in his practical stress on a definite method, Kriya, opening for the first time the doors of yoga freedom to all men. Apart from the miracles of his own life, surely the Yogavatar reached the zenith of all wonders in reducing the ancient complexities of yoga to an effective simplicity not beyond the ordinary grasp. In reference to miracles, Lahiri Mahasaya often said, the operation of subtle laws which are unknown to people in general should not be publicly discussed or published without due discrimination. If in these pages I have appeared to flout his cautionary words, it is because he has given me an inward reassurance. Also, in recording the lives of Babaji, Lahiri Mahasaya and Sri Yukteswar, I have thought it advisable to omit many true miraculous stories, which could hardly have been included without writing, also, an explanatory volume of abstruse philosophy. New Hope for New Men. Divine union, the Yogaveda proclaimed, is possible through self-effort, and is not dependent on theological beliefs or on the arbitrary will of a cosmic dictator. Through use of the Kriya key, persons who cannot bring themselves to believe in the divinity of any man will behold at last the full divinity of their own selves. Autobiography of a Yogi. By Paramahansa Yogananda. Chapter 36. Babaji's interest in the West. Master, did you ever meet Babaji? It was a calm summer night in Serampuri. The large stars of the tropics gleamed over our heads as I sat by Sri Yukteswar's side on the second-story balcony of the hermitage. Yes. Master smiled at my direct question, his eyes lit with reverence. 3 times I have been blessed by the sight of the deathless Guru. Our first meeting was in Allahabad at a Kumbh Mela. The religious fairs held in India since time immemorial are known as Kumbh Melas. They have kept spiritual goals in constant sight of the multitude. Devout Hindus gather by the millions every 6 years to meet thousands of sadhus, yogis, swamis, and ascetics of all kinds. Many are hermits who never leave their secluded haunts except to attend the melas and bestow their blessings on worldly men and women. I was not a swami at the time I met Babaji, Sri Yukteswar went on. But I had already received Kriya initiation from Lahiri Mahasaya. He encouraged me to attend the Mela which was convening in January, 1894 at Allahabad. It was my first experience of a kumbh. I felt slightly dazed by the clamor and surge of the crowd. In my searching gazes around I saw no illumined face of a master. Passing a bridge on the bank of the Ganges, I noticed an acquaintance standing nearby, his begging bowl extended. Oh, this fair is nothing but a chaos of noise and beggars, I thought in disillusionment. I wonder if Western scientists, patiently enlarging the realms of knowledge for the practical good of mankind, are not more pleasing to God than these idlers who profess religion but concentrate on alms. My smoldering reflections on social reform were interrupted by the voice of a tall sannyasi who halted before me. Sir, he said, a saint is calling you. Who is he? Come and see for yourself. Hesitantly following this laconic advice, I soon found myself near a tree whose branches were sheltering a guru with an attractive group of disciples. The master, a bright unusual figure, with sparkling dark eyes, rose at my approach and embraced me. Welcome, Swamiji, he said affectionately. Sir, I replied emphatically, I am not a Swami. Those on whom I am divinely directed to bestow the title of Swami never cast it off. The saint addressed me simply, but deep conviction of truth rang in his words. I was engulfed in an instant wave of spiritual blessing. Smiling at my sudden elevation into the ancient monastic order, I bowed at the feet of the obviously great and angelic being in human form who had thus honored me. Babaji, for it was indeed he, motioned me to a seat near him under the tree. He was strong and young, and looked like Lahiri Mahasaya, yet the resemblance did not strike me, even though I had often heard of the extraordinary similarities in the appearance of the two masters. Babaji possesses a power by which he can prevent any specific thought from arising in a person's mind. Evidently the great Guru wished me to be perfectly natural in his presence, not overawed by knowledge of his identity. What do you think of the Kumbh Mela? I was greatly disappointed, sir. I added hastily, up until the time I met you. Somehow saints and this commotion don't seem to belong together. Child, the master said, though apparently I was nearly twice his own age, for the faults of the many, judge not the whole. Everything on earth is of mixed character, like a mingling of sand and sugar. Be like the wise ant which seizes only the sugar, and leaves the sand untouched. Though many sadhus here still wander in delusion, yet the Mela is blessed by a few men of God realization. In view of my own meeting with this exalted master, I quickly agreed with his observation. Sir, I commented, I have been thinking of the scientific men of the West, greater by far in intelligence than most people congregated here, living in distant Europe and America, professing different creeds, and ignorant of the real values of such melas as the present one. They are the men who could benefit greatly by meetings with India's masters. But, although high in intellectual attainments, many Westerners are wedded to rank materialism. Others, famous in science and philosophy, do not recognize the essential unity in religion. Their creeds serve as insurmountable barriers that threaten to separate them from us forever. I saw that you are interested in the West, as well as the East. Babaji's face beamed with approval. I felt the pangs of your heart, broad enough for all men, whether Oriental or Occidental. That is why I summoned you here. East and West must establish a golden middle path of activity and spirituality combined, he continued. India has much to learn from the West in material development. In return, India can teach the universal methods by which the West will be able to base its religious beliefs on the unshakable foundations of yogic science. You, Swamiji, have a part to play in the coming harmonious exchange between Orient and Occident. Some years hence I shall send you a disciple whom you can train for yoga dissemination in the West. The vibrations there of many spiritually seeking souls come flood-like to me. I perceive potential saints in America and Europe, waiting to be awakened. At this point in his story, Sri Yukteswar turned his gaze fully on mine. My son, he said, smiling in the moonlight, you are the disciple that, years ago, Babaji promised to send me. I was happy to learn that Babaji had directed my steps to Sri Yukteswar, yet it was hard for me to visualize myself in the remote West, away from my beloved Guru and the simple hermitage peace. Babaji then spoke of the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Yukteswar went on. To my astonishment, he indicated by a few words of praise that he was aware of the fact that I had written interpretations on various Gita chapters. At my request, Swamiji, please undertake another task, the great master said. Will you not write a short book on the underlying basic unity between the Christian and Hindu scriptures? Show by parallel references that the inspired sons of God have spoken the same truths, now obscured by men's sectarian differences. Maharaj, I answered diffidently, what a command! Shall I be able to fulfill it? Babaji laughed softly. My son, why do you doubt? He said reassuringly. Indeed, whose work is all this, and who is the doer of all actions? Whatever the Lord has made me say is bound to materialize as truth. I deemed myself empowered by the blessings of the saint, and agreed to write the book. Feeling reluctantly that the parting hour had arrived, I rose from my leafy seat. Do you know Lahiri? The master inquired. He is a great soul, isn't he? Tell him of our meeting. He then gave me a message for Lahiri Mahasaya. After I had bowed humbly in farewell, the saint smiled benignly. When your book is finished, I shall pay you a visit, he promised. Goodbye for the present. I left Allahabad the following day and entrained for Benares. Reaching my guru's home, I poured out the story of the wonderful saint at the Kumbh Mela. Oh, didn't you recognize him? Lahiri Mahasaya's eyes were dancing with laughter. I see you couldn't, for he prevented you. He is my incomparable guru, the celestial Babaji. Babaji. I repeated, awestruck. The Yogi Christ Babaji. The invisible visible Savior Babaji. Oh, if I could just recall the past and be once more in his presence, to show my devotion at his lotus feet. Never mind, Lahiri Mahasaya said consolingly. He has promised to see you again. Guru Deva, the Divine Master asked me to give you a message. Tell Lahiri, he said, that the stored up power for this life now runs low, it is nearly finished. At my utterance of these enigmatic words, Lahiri Mahasaya's figure trembled as though touched by a lightning current. In an instant everything about him fell silent, his smiling countenance turned incredibly stern. Like a wooden statue, somber and immovable in its seat, his body became colorless. I was alarmed and bewildered. Never in my life had I seen this joyous soul manifest such awful gravity. The other disciples present stared apprehensively. 3 hours passed in utter silence. Then Lahiri Mahasaya resumed his natural, cheerful demeanor, and spoke affectionately to each of the chelas. Everyone sighed in relief. I realized by my master's reaction that Babaji's message had been an unmistakable signal by which Lahiri Mahasaya understood that his body would soon be untenanted. His awesome silence proved that my guru had instantly controlled his being, cut his last cord of attachment to the material world, and fled to his ever-living identity in spirit. Babaji's remark had been his way of saying, I shall be ever with you. Though Babaji and Lahiri Mahasaya were omniscient, and had no need of communicating with each other through me or any other intermediary, the great ones often condescend to play a part in the human drama. Occasionally they transmit their prophecies through messengers in an ordinary way, that the final fulfillment of their words may infuse greater divine faith in a wide circle of men who later learn the story. I soon left Benares, and set to work in Serampuri on the scriptural writings requested by Babaji. Sri Yukteswar continued. No sooner had I begun my task than I was able to compose a poem dedicated to the deathless Guru. The melodious lines flowed effortlessly from my pen, though never before had I attempted Sanskrit poetry. In the quiet of night I busied myself over a comparison of the Bible and the scriptures of Sanatana Dharma. Quoting the words of the Blessed Lord Jesus, I showed that his teachings were in essence one with the revelations of the Vedas. To my relief, my book was finished in a short time. I realized that this speedy blessing was due to the grace of my Param Guru Maharaj. The chapters first appeared in the Sadhu Sambad journal, later they were privately printed as a book by one of my Kidarpur disciples. The morning after I had concluded my literary efforts, Master continued, I went to the Rai Ghat here to bathe in the Ganges. The Ghat was deserted. I stood still for a while, enjoying the sunny peace. After a dip in the sparkling waters, I started for home. The only sound in the silence was that of my Ganges-drenched cloth, swish-swashing with every step. As I passed beyond the site of the large banyan tree near the river bank, a strong impulse urged me to look back. There, under the shade of the banyan, and surrounded by a few disciples, sat the great Babaji. Greetings, Swamiji. The beautiful voice of the Master rang out to assure me I was not dreaming. I see you have successfully completed your book. As I promised, I am here to thank you. With a fast-beating heart, I prostrate myself fully at his feet. Param Guruji, I said imploringly, will you and your chelas not honor my nearby home with your presence? The Supreme Guru smilingly declined. No, child, he said, we are people who like the shelter of trees, this spot is quite comfortable. Please tarry a while, Master. I gazed entreatingly at him. I shall be back at once with some special sweetmeats. When I returned in a few minutes with a dish of delicacies, lo! The lordly banyan no longer sheltered the celestial troop. I searched all around the god, but in my heart I knew the little band had already fled on etheric wings. I was deeply hurt. Even if we meet again, I would not care to talk to him, I assured myself. He was unkind to leave me so suddenly. This was a wrath of love, of course, and nothing more. A few months later I visited Lahiri Mahasaya in Benares. As I entered his little parlor, my guru smiled in greeting. "Welcome, Yuteswar," he said. "Did you just meet Babaji at the threshold of my room?" "Why, no," I answered in surprise. "Come here." Lahiri Mahasaya touched me gently on the forehead. At once I beheld, near the door, the form of Babaji, blooming like a perfect lotus. I remembered my old hurt, and did not bow. Lahiri Mahasaya looked at me in astonishment. The divine guru gazed at me with fathomless eyes. "You are annoyed with me." "Sir, why shouldn't I be?" I answered. "Out of the air you came with your magic group, and into the thin air you vanished. I told you I would see you, but didn't say how long I would remain." Babaji laughed softly. "You were full of excitement. I assure you that I was fairly extinguished in the ether by the gust of your restlessness." I was instantly satisfied by this unflattering explanation. I knelt at his feet. The Supreme Guru patted me kindly on the shoulder. "Child, you must meditate more," he said. "Your gaze is not yet faultless. You could not see me hiding behind the sunlight." With these words in the voice of a celestial flute, Babaji disappeared into the hidden radiance. That was one of my last visits to Benares to see my guru, Sri Yuteswar concluded. Even as Babaji had foretold at the Kumbh Mela, the householder incarnation of Lahiri Mahasaya was drawing to a close. During the summer of 1895 his stalwart body developed a small boil on the back. He protested against lancing. He was working out in his own flesh the evil karma of some of his disciples. Finally a few chelas became very insistent. The master replied cryptically, "The body has to find a cause to go. I will be agreeable to whatever you want to do." A short time later the incomparable guru gave up his body in Benares. No longer need I seek him out in his little parlor. I find every day of my life blessed by his omnipresent guidance. Years later, from the lips of Swami Keshavananda, an advanced disciple, I heard many wonderful details about the passing of Lahiri Mahasaya. A few days before my guru relinquished his body, Keshavananda told me, he materialized himself before me as I sat in my hermitage at Hardwar. "Come at once to Benares." With these words Lahiri Mahasaya vanished. I entrained immediately for Benares. At my guru's home I found many disciples assembled. For hours that day the master expounded the Gita, then he addressed us simply. "I am going home." Sobs of anguish broke out like an irresistible torrent. "Be comforted, I shall rise again." After this utterance Lahiri Mahasaya thrice turned his body around in a circle, faced the north in his lotus posture, and gloriously entered the final Mahasamadhi. Lahiri Mahasaya's beautiful body, so dear to the devotees, was cremated with solemn householder rites at Manikarnika Ghat by the holy Ganges. Keshavananda continued. The following day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, while I was still in Benares, my room was suffused with a great light. Lo! Before me stood the flesh and blood form of Lahiri Mahasaya. It looked exactly like his old body, except that it appeared younger and more radiant. My divine guru spoke to me. "Keshavananda," he said, "it is I. From the disintegrated atoms of my cremated body, I have resurrected a remodeled form. My householder work in the world is done, but I do not leave the earth entirely. Henceforth I shall spend some time with Babaji in the Himalayas, and with Babaji in the cosmos. With a few words of blessing to me, the transcendent master vanished. Wondrous inspiration filled my heart. I was uplifted in spirit even as were the disciples of Christ and Kabir when they had gazed on their living gurus after physical death. When I returned to my isolated Hardwar hermitage, Keshavananda went on, I carried with me the sacred ashes of my guru. I know he has escaped the spatio-temporal cage, the bird of omnipresence is freed. Yet it comforted my heart to enshrine his sacred remains. Another disciple who was blessed by the sight of his resurrected guru was the saintly Panchanan Bhattacharya, founder of the Calcutta Arya Mission Institution. I visited Panchanan at his Calcutta home, and listened with delight to the story of his many years with the Master. In conclusion, he told me of the most marvelous event in his life. Here in Calcutta, Panchanan said, at 10 o'clock of the morning which followed his cremation, Lahiri Mahasaya appeared before me in living glory. Swami Pranabananda, the saint with two bodies, also confided to me the details of his own supernal experience. A few days before Lahiri Mahasaya left his body, Pranabananda told me at the time he visited my Ranchi school, I received a letter from him, requesting me to come at once to Benares. I was delayed, however, and could not leave immediately. As I was in the midst of my travel preparations, about 10 o'clock in the morning, I was suddenly overwhelmed with joy to see the shining figure of my guru. Why hurry to Benares? Lahiri Mahasaya said, smiling. You shall find me there no longer. As the import of his words dawned on me, I sobbed broken-heartedly, believing that I was seeing him only in a vision. The Master approached me comfortingly. Here, touch my flesh, he said. I am living, as always. Do not lament, am I not with you forever? From the lips of these three great disciples, a story of wondrous truth has emerged. At the morning hour of 10, on the day after the body of Lahiri Mahasaya had been consigned to the flames, the resurrected Master, in a real but transfigured body, appeared before three disciples, each one in a different city. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting?